And we are just welcoming everyone here. For those of you watching the recording right now, we're just sharing who we are, where we're located, and all of the amazing organizations and the work that we do in the chat box. So it's amazing to have you all here today.
It was funny when Court and I were discussing topics, that could also be something, if there's just a topic that's really relevant to all of you that you would love to be like, we'd like to explore this with the group in future sessions. Those are great things to drop into the chat as well. But I think this was one that when Court talked about it, I was like, I'll be an interesting speaker on planning, because planning is not my forte, but it's such an interesting kind of topic, because when you dig into reminding yourself how to plan, how do you plan for success, and how do you make a change, like just reviewing the material was so kind of re-challenging for me to think about, like, what do I always know I should do and I'm not doing yet? So, you know, I think I actually felt like just going back through it myself was such a good exercise. So I hope that'll be something that you guys find as well. Perfect. So yeah, I appreciate it when you guys put what you're working on. That's great, Daniel. Thank you for that. Okay. All right, well, Court, we are at the hour. You want to kick us off and we'll get ourselves underway.
I'd be happy to. And y'all just keep using the chat box as much as you like during this session. I'm going to do my best to keep up with it. If I miss something, you can always post it again. Okay. So yes, I'm Court McCracken, and I work here at Get Connected by Galaxy Digital, working on a lot of our education and outreach. And we're so grateful that you're here to attend today's session on your volunteer program, which is what's most important, planning for success for this year. So Elizabeth Donovan is with us. She's going to be our presenter, sharing information and insights. She has worked with thousands of organizations that here at Get Connected by Galaxy Digital we work with every day. And she's our VP of Sales and State and Network Liaison. So she builds a lot of our community, and she leads the Get Connected team and just understanding what are the challenges that face nonprofits, specifically in working with their volunteers. So balancing those needs of recruiting, engaging, retention, and growing your impact with your volunteer program. And she brings over a decade of experience supporting United Ways and consulting with nonprofits across the nation. So I think that we're really here to focus on, simple strategies that are real world. They really move the needle for you, and implementing them every day to create like a very sustainable program with measurable results. And that's what we're always really focused on for you. And just so grateful that you're here, Elizabeth, to take time to lead this Lunch and Learn discussion. And with that, I'll go ahead and I'll just hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Court. Court's always great because she makes me better. She's the one who keeps me on track. She is my planner behind the scenes. But I would say she's also great in that those real world examples is really fun to kind of have more of a dialogue. So you guys don't have to just listen to me drone on for the next hour. So here we go. I am going to get my screen share started, and we will make sure this is going to work for everybody. So we have got this, and let's go into the slideshow. So holler if we're not seeing it, but I think we all are. So we've got this planning for success, prioritizing for success. This prioritizing is going to be a big piece of what we talk about today. So to get us started, just a little bit more there, as Court said, we are a volunteer management system. I think that is where the expertise that you so kindly put out there, it comes because I'm listening to people every single day and hearing what those pain points are and those problems and challenges are that each and every one of you face. So I would say this is not necessarily original content. This is me stealing, borrowing from some of the experts in the field and trying to pull it together so you can see some really good themes here that, as Court said, are practical. I love the practical stuff you can start to implement day one. So to get us kicked off, I thought some nice words of wisdom would be great. One is coming out of President Eisenhower and his experience in the Second World War. Some of you who are here, I remember I was saying a second ago when this topic came up, I was like, oh, that's the challenging topic for me, planning. I'm not a great intentional project planner. I don't like to have to put myself into these squares. And I thought, reading this, plans are worthless but planning is everything. And I thought, what does that mean? You know, plans are worthless. We know when the day of hits, the plan probably isn't going to get executed flawlessly. But I love the mentality of, in making what my best plan would be, I probably discarded or considered 12 other approaches. So how do you think through all the things you're going to do in a plan? And when you've done that hard work, how does it let you pivot to be able to respond in the moment as your plan will change? I think the next slide, I love this one too. When you do the things in the present that you can see, you are shaping the future that you are yet to see. I think that is a deep one, because you're just thinking about, I can only see this much. But if I'm thinking about what I expect to come, what I think the future may hold, I'm going to be able to shape that future so it doesn't just come at me. It's going to be a future that I've helped guide into place rather than having to react to. So I think all of this to say, planning is a topic that I wasn't sure we'd have a good attendance for, because it's not fun in my mind. But I think when I started to really go back to some of the best practices and principles I've seen through the years, it can be such a game changer in how you address your role, how you address your life, and how you're going to balance some of the things that some of you, just based on the introductions you were doing in chat, you're wearing 2 or 3 hats already. So I think that piece of how do we manage as a project manager, as someone who needs to get a lot accomplished, and, you know, frontline nonprofits and organizations like yourselves, we depend on that accomplishment happening, or a lot of people don't get helped. So I think that's a weight. And I think that weight on the shoulders, how do you think about doing it so that you can go to sleep at night and you can feel like you're accomplishing the right things? So the topics we're going to cover today, just to kind of get into our agenda, part of it is that success. How do you prioritize so that you can sit comfortable, so you can go to sleep at night knowing that you have been working on the most important thing for your role, for your organization, for the good that you're trying to accomplish? And then secondly, how do you make that sustainable? I think sustainable is a word that just through the years I've seen so much effort goes into so many things. And the organizations that really start to get momentum are those that are finding repeatable, sustainable plans and projects that they can make better and better over time. So looking at how we start to guide ourselves toward doing that. All right, so some of what I'm going to be pulling out into this next piece here actually came out of a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So I was going to just kick it to you for a second, Court, because I know this is a book that's on her shelf, and I have not read it all the way through. And let's see if I can keep Adobe Acrobat from doing something. Let's enable extension. Hope for the best. There we go. All right, here we go. Oh no, let's get out of this one. 1 second, guys. So going back to this, Court, if you want to give us just a little bit of a kind of what you brought out of the book. I think I always like to plug some different resources people can go into. So things about that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, anything that you want to bring to play that you think was really a piece that people might pull out of it as well. We're going to cover some of it, but
absolutely. I love planning. It's something that I get really excited about, and I spend a lot of time studying. And I think my favorite thing specifically about that book was really learning to sort of quantify how important something was to do right now versus how important it was to space out over time. And I think that gave me a lot of perspective on how I had originally been, and I worked in a lot of nonprofit organizations as well, how I had been sort of managing my flow. And I think it brought just a level of consciousness to particular activities that helped me actually be able to set some better boundaries for myself, my own energy, and also within the organizations that I worked at. So I think that kind of quantifying how important something is to do right now versus how important it is to kind of space out. But there's a lot in there. So yeah.
Yeah, so if you like a little bit of what we're doing today, part of it came out of that book. So again, it's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That would be a really good one to dive further into. The part that we're gonna kind of look at out of this is going to be defined a little bit by who you are. And I've pulled kind of two personas here just to give you guys a little bit of, you'll fit somewhere probably into one of these. When you think about planning, it's not a one size fits all. The first persona I'm defining here, a food security program. You may have the same sort of thing, whether it's a homelessness program, whether it's an animal program. When you're dealing with something that has an audience that needs to be helped and served every single day, that schedule is on a daily repeat. That means you don't get to have a day of planning or this, that, or the other, because the tasks and the schedule is every single day. A daily outcome has to be met. So when you think about project planning, and a little bit of this is going to be your homework, it's just going to be sitting down with your calendar and thinking about your schedule. Project planning has to be put onto a calendar, just like a one-on-one meeting, a very high priority one-on-one meeting that you would not miss. You're meeting with yourself, but you're meeting with yourself to do the most important thing. So we're going to start weaving that through. Think about your schedule. If you're someone who has tasks, you have an audience that enters the door every single day, then you may have to really start to protect an hour in the morning or an hour in the afternoon that becomes your focus hour. The second persona, and some of you may be more in this realm, if you're working with something that doesn't happen every single day, it's a mentoring program. So the afternoons are very full, or maybe before school, but you get big blocks in the middle, or it's something that has a Saturday element to it. So Monday, Tuesdays aren't really hectic, but Wednesday through Saturday is. So think again, you're starting to look for a pattern for yourself of where can you start to guard some time. And I think part of what we'll talk about in this kind of scheduling as we move into it is how you communicate, how you're guarding your time. So we'll come back to that, I think, on a future slide. If we don't, Court, make sure we come back to that, because I think guarding it is so important. All right, so let's start with a list. I think building a list is the task that a lot of times it's so rewarding to cross something off of a list. I do enjoy that moment of like, I did something, it's done. But I think it's also very deceptive in that lists can kind of get you into a busy work mode and not so much an intentional mode. So when you make this list, I would suggest the first thing you do after figuring out how to get yourself some time is to sit down with just a blank piece of paper, a quiet space, just you, and start to roll through some of the questions. What would make my community better that I want to prioritize? What is in my work that I could change? What would make me more effective? What's something, an element that is going to take me forward? Is there an idea or a concept, something that you saw last year, the year before, changes all around us right now, something that's changing that you're seeing potential in, or that you're seeing a drawback and you need to be able to address it before it becomes a big problem? Some of that is going to be you. It's your role and what you see that maybe the organization does not even have a hint of yet, but you see something there and you want to think about it. The bad ideas are important. You can do this with yourself. I'm going to just lay out after you've done it for yourself. Do it with a teammate, do it then with a whiteboard in a group over a lunch or something, but let them, I think Court and I were talking about, the first thing I always am doing is the way my mind works. Idea comes up, I bat it down. Idea comes up, I like it. Idea comes up, I want to tweak it. Force yourself to set the premise of the meeting that, guys, we're going to get some really bad ideas on this board. You're going to have a bad idea that you could say one word or all of it, be like, oh yeah, that was stupid. Don't let your group do that. You want to start with just saying, hey, I'm going to write them all down. Now, for those of you who are worried, I'm definitely going to have another meeting or a chance to say, green idea, it's beautiful. Red idea, this was terrible. We cannot do this. So don't worry. These are not going to be like our ideas, but let's throw them out. Just start listing them, because usually about 10, 12 ideas in, there's something that you'll see that you're like, this would be really cool if we did it this way. So getting them all up on the board is important. Giant list, small list, start weeding it down, but that list is where we're going to start. Anything there, Court? You good with that piece? We'll keep going.
Yes, I think it's so important not to judge the ideas too early. A lot of times when we're like planning, we're like, we are busy. We have to get things done, right? So I actually really love planning a brainstorming session. Like we're not making any decisions. This is just about brainstorming. And then we'll refine those ideas moving forward based on our goals and how they fit in. So if it's retention, we'll just sit and we'll have a brainstorming idea about everything we could do about retention and just let that be in that session. Because maybe you only choose 3 activities out of a list of 20, but those are the ones you eventually commit to. You may revisit some of those things. So actually planning a session that's just for allowing ideas to flow is really helpful, knowing that you'll refine moving forward. And a lot of times we're just so busy that we don't give enough time to brainstorming. So I think it's very important.
That's good. Next part is a little bit of a story I'm going to share here, but the next part is you can't do everything on the list. Just like Court said, you got to kind of start to hone it down. So this was this kind of you'll find this in a lot of books. It's an often repeated story, but it's kind of that $1 million, I think it's actually supposed to be a $500,000 idea, but it happened back in the day with the steel industry. So Ivy League consultant, Charles Schwab, steel industry. So this is a business strategy. And what I like about it is the reason it's lingered is because the strategy applies to no matter who you are, your role, your organization, it applies across the board. So basically the premise of this was, as each of us know and can make that list that we just described, like, you know what you need to do, you know what's on that list. There's a lot of things on that list and they're kind of really a pretty long list. The hard part is figuring out how to do it all. I think the conversation that's relayed here is that Charles was basically like, I don't need a consultant to tell me what to do. I need to figure out how we're going to do it. And if you've got the million idea to get it done, like, I'll pay you what this idea is worth. And so that was where the story is, where Ivy Lee said, make your list. And then those six things, weed it down, as Court said. There's that second kind of refine it meeting. Get to your top 6 and prioritize them. What thing is the most important thing on my list? What's second? What's third? What's fourth? And this idea that is not that revolutionary, but it is something that it's hard and it's an accountability, is you work on number 1. Because the most important thing, if you do it every single day until number 1 is done, and you can move down to number 2, it means that at the end of the day, you didn't just work really hard and you didn't just do a lot of things and cross them off your list. You put that intentional effort into that number 1 that was going to change everything for your organization, that number 1 that was going to have a big impact in the year to come. I think we were talking a little bit about an example of one of our clients that was going out after one of the FEMA grants. And the FEMA grant was based off of volunteer hours. So their most important thing became, how do we get as many thousands of volunteer hours into our system as possible so that our volunteer management software could produce the Get Connected report that we could turn into FEMA, that we could get the grant. So that became the mantra across the board. Most important thing, make sure volunteers understand the importance of their hours. Most important thing, make sure they entered them. How can I get more people to push them toward it today? So the most important thing has nuances. There's action steps. It's not just one thing. But once you've identified the first thing, you just work on that first thing as long as you can. You may have to move to something on the list because you just get to a place where you have to stop for a minute. But that idea of the first thing comes first, that is what, as the story goes, moved the steel industry. It moved Charles Schwab up the ladder. It moved him into first, second, third of the steel industry. Because instead of having all the things to get done, he worked on the most important thing. And that idea was why it changed his business. So I think as we think through, like, what is the most important thing, prioritizing it becomes a big piece of this. You need to make sure that it's the most important thing that your leadership, that your organization, that the community results are tied to, because part of what we're going to talk about is you have to have time to accomplish the most important thing. So you have to have buy-in, that the people around you support that this is the most important thing you can be doing. So what is really important? That list, you have to revisit it. Maybe you're going to revisit it once a quarter, once every 6 months. If you're spending a lot of time on that most important thing, it needs to be right. And it may change because something may change in your organization, in who you're serving, and that change forces the priority to change. That idea of the FEMA grant was not on the radar of the city I was talking about until COVID hit. that changed a priority for them. And so they had to adjust. So that moment of just making sure that when you go to sleep at night, I know there's always a list in my mind that I did not get to that day. But if I know that I spent time on that thing that I really think is going to change everything for us, it's okay. I did what I needed to do. So I think that's the part that is really helpful from a time management, feeling good that you've accomplished something standpoint. But it's also just making sure that the synergy there that's the important part. If we accomplish this, it does move the needle for us. Scheduling it, this is the slide. Haha, I knew there was going to be a good slide on this, and Court and I talked a lot about this. It's the part I do not do well at. It's putting that intentional planning, day, hour, whatever works with your persona. Again, you've got to look at your schedule and think, how are you going to make this sustainable so that I have this intentional time reserved? I think one, and this is where my personal struggle is, it's prioritizing your focus time as more important than the other things you're going to get asked for. Because I will always de-emphasize, oh, I put that hour there, but they need help over here, I'll go do that first. Or I'm in a meeting, no, we can run long, it's okay, it's just me afterwards. So because of that, I deprioritize that intentional focus time. And it is, the bullet point here says it's a fight, because you are fighting to make sure that you prioritize that time. And also that you start to communicate to your staff, to your team, to your coworkers, that this isn't movable. This is important, because this time is where I'm going to work on our business and not just be working in it where I can't plan for the future. So I think one thing, Court, you said, and I thought you did it really well, is how do you communicate how and what you're doing to the rest of your team so that they understand?
Right, exactly. I think it's one of those things when you've set the goals for your program, and maybe for this year for you, it's engagement. Like we're really focused on engaging the volunteers we already have and getting them active. So every week at Tuesday at 10, this is when I sit down and I make my engagement plans and I take action towards that, because I know that 30, 60, 90 days from now, if I do that consistently, that's when I'll see something start to happen. And the tough part is when we're working in a busy organization and there's people that need us right in front of us, that becomes very urgent and can take our focus away. And a lot of times there's this gap of time where we're doing the focused work and nothing kind of comes above the surface. Like you can't see anything for between 30 to 90 days sometimes. And so it's like letting people know this is the time of the week when I focus on engagement. And that's our number one goal in our volunteer program this year. Get on board with me about that. And when you show that you're excited about that, and they can be excited about it too. And then everyone starts hearing engagement. And then how can I help? How can I support engagement? So there is a certain level of not just guarding it, back away, but enthusiasm about that time and that priority. And that's a really good question that I think someone's bringing up about, Laura bringing up about how many goals, how much focus, some people say 6, some people say 3, some people say 1. That is very personal. I found that typically I personally don't go beyond 3 big goals. And a lot of times, because when you have a big goal, scheduling the most important thing, the tough part about that is the big goal involves a lot of those little tiny goals along the way. So we'll probably get to a little bit of that in the next material that Elizabeth's about to talk about. But I typically personally keep it between 1 and 3. That's been my experience. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, no, I think that I would agree with that. I think once you get past 3, you can work on other things, but once you get past 3 that you've prioritized, you've lost the most important thing, because those others, if they're in position 4, 5, and 6, they're not the most important thing. And you've got to spend your time on the most important ones. I think the only other thing I was going to say is when you do that calendar, look for times that can be consistent each week, because I think there's a piece I start to see where, like if Tuesday is your planning day, and it's going to take some time for you to block out some time on that day, but they start to see that rhythm in your teammates. If they ask you for something on Tuesday, your response is, Tuesday's my planning day, so on Wednesday, I'll get back to you. So they start to see there's a lag time there. This day is held, and that is when I'll get back to you. If you need something urgent, you need to get it to me before Tuesday. So they start to learn your habits, and it's amazing to me how people just start to respect that because they understand that's your rhythm. And your rhythm, once they understand it, they work with it. I think same thing, that communicating how important and exciting it is. I think communicating why you're asking for something by a certain date. If I have an hour on Tuesday morning where I'm going to work on this, then saying, hey, Court, I need something by end of day on Friday, and giving her the context because I'm going to use it when I'm planning on Tuesday, lets her know if I don't get it to Elizabeth on Friday, she can't think about it, prioritize it, and move forward with the planning on Tuesday. So it opens those lanes of kind of accountability and communication so that Court can say, hey, I'm not going to have it by Friday. That lets you then say, okay, I'll need to work on something else. Or how can I help her get it done? Because it does have to happen. So I think a lot of that's just working with your staff to make sure you're communicating well, what you're doing and when you're doing it, how you're working on the most important thing, so that they're also supporting your intentional time and supporting you with the pieces maybe you need to plan with. So I think that kind of all ties in together. This is just another quote we're pulling in here. So plan for what is difficult while it is easy. Do what is great while it is small. I think that piece is going to lead us into this next part of kind of, again, a lot of this is out of that 7 Habits book, but planning for what is difficult while it is easy, do what is great while it is small, has a lot to do with urgency. So as we go into this next part, and some of you may have seen this before, I think this is a part that I really, myself revisiting the material, started thinking through again. It's a way for you to, there's different methods. I think, Court, you've got one you may share in a minute where there's that kind of ABC, which tasks do I do first, second, third. This is more just kind of starting that overall premise of where does this task live? And I think there's a lot of tasks that hide in different blocks. So when you think about quadrants, what you're trying to do here is look at a task and say, okay, if it's urgent and important, I have to do it. It's in quadrant 1. That's something that hits my list every day. Quadrant 2, it's not urgent, but it's important. And I think this is the piece that Court was talking about a minute ago that may take 30 to 90 days before the work really starts to bubble up. It's while it's still easy, it's not urgent yet. You've got time on your side, but it's quadrant 2. It's important. So it has to be prioritized, even though it doesn't have that sense of urgency. It has to happen, or by the time that 90-day window has passed, it's something urgent and important, and it's no longer easy. So we get on to quadrant 3 and 4. And I think these are the 2 that are really the ones that you have to really be accountable to try to shorten those lists as fast as you can. So quadrant 3, it's urgent, but it's not important. Delegate's a very loaded word because I think if I could delegate a lot of this stuff, I would. And some of you can't, like you literally, there's no one I can pass some things to. So it has to stay on your list. But it's the urgency part that forces time away from those things that you want to plan for. It's so urgent, it has to get done. We talked about the persona of someone who's dealing with food security. It has to get done. The meals have to be served. If you're short-staffed, that may be you on the front line. So the part of it isn't to immediately throw up a wall and be like, that's urgent, but it's not important, off my plate. The idea is to identify what keeps falling in that quadrant and start to mitigate it. Start to use one of your planning sessions to think through, how can I make that easier to handle? How can I delegate it if possible? How can I take that off of the list entirely because it's something that's dragging us backwards? So look for the things in that quadrant 3 because they're the ones that really can be focused on in the planning sessions. Quadrant 4 are the ones that we have them on the list. And I think the best way I heard it, it just lingers, it's lingering there. It never goes away. I never get to it. And there's this moment of like, why is it on my list? If it's not urgent enough to eventually have a priority level where I address it, maybe you just take it off the list. And sometimes those feel really good because you just cross them off the list. You didn't do anything, but they're gone off the list and they don't move with you forward in time. And it's just kind of a clearing of that closet. It's really nice. I think that the piece that you have to be really sensitive to is time, because time has an impact. And I think that quote of doing things while they're easy, if they're not urgent, it's a lot easier than when they become urgent. And now that procrastinator hat is on and you have to get it done. And when it becomes urgent, sometimes a lot more things now have to start falling off the plate. And don't be fooled. I think that piece of the ones that fall into, they're not that important, but they're always urgent and in your face. Those can be the tasks that you do. And you felt like you had a really busy, effective day, but you didn't accomplish anything. And at the end of the week, you're like, I'm no further ahead than I was last week. It's because those urgent tasks are just building up and we've got to think through how to address them. Court, do you want to talk a little bit to the idea before we move on to planning of how you can kind of take those micro steps underneath? Because I think that is a good point of the action steps that fall underneath each big header.
Yes. And someone just asked a really great question too of any templates for the planning hour, scheduling, and general work. And I will speak to that. I use a project planning tool called Asana, and they have a free version and a paid version that has templates for all different types of projects. What's really great about Asana and what I love about it is it helps me do what's in these quadrants. It helps me label, breaking things up into smaller pieces, because most of the time we're just like kind of, I'll type it in the chat. We're like, okay, maybe I'm going to get my volunteer site up and running, because we know I need to have a web presence so I can recruit more volunteers, because my number one priority is recruitment. So, but that's really 100 tiny steps, right? So we really need to think about that. Do you mind to go back to the last slide really quick? Someone was asking to do that, Elizabeth, if you can go backwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what I like about Asana is it helps me to break things down into teeny tiny pieces. And then I can rate them low, medium, high, and then I can assign dates to them. And like I said, everyone, I love planning and I love breaking things up into small pieces so that I can move the needle on those bigger projects. And for you, whatever that number one priority is for your program, it's going to happen in really small steps of focused time. And so the templates I use are in Asana, and that helps me get a lot done. It also helps me put it on the calendar because I have it integrated with my Google Calendar. And then that's like a meeting. It's like I show up to that hour. This is when I brainstorm. This is when I get my writing done. This is when I respond to emails. And I just let people know that that's what I'm doing, but really rating those tasks and breaking them up into micro steps. And then during your tiny hour of work, maybe getting a couple of those micro steps done, and then just letting it be and knowing you'll come back to it. And Linda, I can share with you a resource about recruitment as well. So let me drop that in the chat. I'll let Elizabeth go on too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Trello is another one that comes up as a free resource. So Trello, if you want to write that one in there, it's another one that you can kind of have project cards. So again, you're keeping your cards, and it's each time if you're pulling in someone else to help you on something, or you're going to assign a task out, it lets you kind of plan which card is moving forward, which one's completed, which one's in progress. That's something I'm using for the first time this year. So I'm not an expert by far, but it's something that I've already seen. As I bring it into the next meeting, it's a visual of what we're working on, what's most important, what's starting to be too many cards in a section that we need to say, okay, which one's the most important? Because we can't do all of this. How do we start to be more focused? I think that is part of what we come across this so often, where I think you have to almost use your first sessions, if you haven't done this before, to think about how you're going to implement protecting that time and protecting that focus hour, and getting some of those urgents off your plate so you do have more time. Finding how to get more time is probably your first task. And I think secondly, once you've done that, then it's, as you just said, it's using using that time really wisely. We see that with a lot of our administrators and volunteer coordinators. They have to make time to build out volunteer management software. What we work with Get Connected, it's not a scheduling tool, it's a management software. You have to build your workflows into the software because you're trying to automate something that took a lot of steps previously. So protecting that time, to your point, Court, it's making sure that there's buy-in from other departments and directors that you're going to be building something that they can't see or touch for a while, and that it's coming, but if I don't get that priority time to do the thing, I can't get it done. So project time, sometimes not just planning, but project time to work on the element that you planned out, protecting project time. I think all of those things where it's you work, you really just have to start to give more importance to it so it gets that consideration it needs from the people around you. All right, planning on repeat. So we're going to keep in mind as we move into this repeat structural section, the personas. So your planning cycle needs to fit your schedule. Not only do you have that persona of someone whose time is different, but your organizations have different rhythms. So you want to keep in mind what's going to be the rhythm. How do you work? So this won't be one size fits all. Just take the basic principles if you can. Most important thing. So keeping in mind, if I'm starting to build or do something that isn't aligned with what I've kind of prioritized as my most important thing, is it where I should be spending my time? I think make sure that you're kind of challenging yourself on. If I'm going to put a lot of time into building something that I can see as structural, repeat it, it better fit in with my priority and goals, or it would not be worth the time I'm about to invest into it. Recurring versus one time. That's a little bit of what I just alluded to. It's going to happen again and again. Let's make sure it's aligned with that strategic goal. So the example I'm going to bring up today is actually from United Way of King County. So they're over in Seattle. This is an annual type event, but it's an event that happens to all of us. I was telling Court, death and taxes, it's taxes. So tax season will always come. It will always come in April, unless something happens. And it will always come with this cyclical pattern of how you have to recruit, engage, schedule, recruit, engage, schedule, year after year. So I think the first thing to point out here is structural programs. When you're starting to look at them, there's something you're going to build year after year after year. So you almost have these cycles that you're getting ready for. And first year will be different than second year, and you're thinking forward over time. This one's an interesting example because they have it split in different seasons as well as different roles. So for instance, you have your in-person community intake specialist. Elizabeth could do that. I don't have any accounting or tax consulting background. I could not be a tax preparation specialist, but I can absolutely help with scheduling people or greeting them. So they've got a place to direct that role straight in. They have people that want to work in person. They have people that do not want to work in person. So they've kind of created these avenues and roles for engagement so their volunteers can head down the path that appeals to their skill set or appeals to how they want to interact. Then as they you think about a season, January through April, it becomes a calendar. This is actually out of our software. So what you're seeing here is just some of the things they were doing in January. You move into any given day, and you can see on this January 18th example I grabbed all the different locations. So again, they're using management software to give lots of role options, timing options, location options, and they're guiding people very intentionally into a schedule to be showing up and accountable for an actual opportunity. What I think is the part I want to play in here, in that you want to think about how you recruit for something intentional like that. And I think tax preparation is such a good example, because right now, if I was to reach out to United Way King County, and I'm extrapolating here, but let's say I said I want to help, they probably would say, well, we don't need, or we've already trained our tax specialists. You're too late for that part. Maybe they still need some intake specialists. But there's this moment of capturing someone's attention when they want to help you, so they can maintain an engagement, so that when they are opening up the next class or the next training session for volunteers for the 23 season, I'm still intrigued. So having something like, your website, this is a spotlight on our volunteer management software, when you're getting them connected and you're actually moving them through the link, you may just be recruiting during the actual event for people who cannot help you during that event, but they're seeing the media, they're hearing about it from people in their family and their circles. And so they're intrigued, and that's when they're there. So having the ability to recruit someone, even when you don't want to use them right then, is important. You need them to be able to respond, to show interest, so that you know they were interested. That lets you start to plan out, again, these cycles. So you have, in this example, a cycle of recruitment. You have that cycle of training in the fall. They're now in the schedule in the spring. People along the way are being captured for that next cycle. You've got a summer of engagement where something strategic needs to happen, where either it's a similar task, just something that you're reporting on, a measurable that you're excited about because of how well the program went this year. What is it that's going to engage them over those summer months, so that come fall, when you're ready to start off the next training schedule, those people who expressed interest that are new to your group are coming through. You've retained the ones that were there before because you kept news and engagement with them along the way. And then in the fall, you're asking those who have volunteered with you in the past to express interest and get any friends, family, recruit people who are like-minded that might come in to help with the next wave. So I think this is a long-term example. You may have some very short event cycles that happen every other week, but this type of rhythm of how you engage, schedule, recruit, retain, it's a rhythm you have to think through for anything you're building. And as part of your plan, you're planning out how will you create a rhythm. There's some things that the government doesn't do well. There's actually a term you can look up, though, that they do very well. And it's in emergency management response. It's called an after action report. So I've pulled a lot of this out of the after action report mentality, because I think what's really intriguing about it is they don't necessarily make changes mid-course, but when something has stopped and they finish it, an after action report is a requirement. And that after action report is where they reflect and they think about what was missing, what didn't work, and what will they measure, and what will they do different the next time. So in this kind of synopsis, it's just thinking about what you just did. If it's a VITA program, if it's a big donor event, if it's a big volunteer event, recruitment, whatever it might be, what went right? Feedback. You want to get feedback from a lot of different roles. So what did the volunteers appreciate? What confused them? Talk to some of the participants. Did they like it? What was their experience like? Was the result, was the impact that was supposed to happen? Did you have a measurable? Did you hit that goal? If a measurable wasn't defined, that wasn't well defined, we should probably do that for the next one. Where should I store all of this? Post-project, everything you did probably could be honed, tweaked, and used again. So where do I put it all so I can find that file? Making a quick list of the things I definitely want to do differently next time. How am I going to keep these people engaged? How am I going to get them to help me recruit more? The post-project is kind of just a real reflection. It should be one of your focus hours, thinking about all of this. I think one point you made when we were talking once, Court, was the neutral things and how they can be kind of time suckers. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but that to me was a really interesting piece too.
Yeah, something that I've realized, especially when we're focusing on these big goals, and we have so many great questions, and I want to make sure to try and have some time to get to all of those, and also say that these topics of recruitment, engagement, and retention are really big, and they're very important. They're really the number one priorities, and we kind of, every organization sort of cycles through, like, we're thinking about them all the time. How do we do those things? So what I will say is that, someone asked about, engaging off your previous list, but what if you need to build your list of volunteers? So then that to me definitely sounds like a focus on recruitment and building that list, that base of volunteerism. And so it is hard to engage if you don't have a big list yet of volunteers and creating that base. And so really kind of getting rid of any of those neutral activities. I could be sending out emails, inviting people over and over again, but if I don't have enough people on that list, And then I do need to focus on sort of driving people to that list and getting more volunteer contact information. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. I did post a resource on volunteer recruitment that's pretty robust in the chat. And I can also add that to an additional resources in the follow-up email. But I feel like we opened up just a really big topic in talking about planning. This kind of what we're talking about right now would sort of be nestled into more of an overarching strategic plan. This would be like your practices of how you carry out a strategic plan. And then sort of within that would be your focuses. So we could really talk about recruitment, engagement, and retention separately as well. So that's sort of how this topic is like fitting into that tree. And I do think that the post-project wrap up is actually really important, because that's when you do find those activities. And sometimes they're activities we're really committed to and we really love doing them, but they actually didn't move the needle for us on engagement. I could be handing out flyers over and over again, but if all my volunteers said they never saw any of the flyers, then I want to ask them, how did they actually hear about coming here? And when you find that out, that's when you put your energy into that thing next time around. So find out where your current volunteers came from, and then just do more of that if they're your ideal volunteers. So there's a lot we could talk about and we could keep going, but I want to make sure that we wrap up and have some more time for question. And I do want to let everyone know that I am seeing your questions and I'm like, wow, there's so much for us to do here. So
and we'll actually probably use, as Court alluded to before, some of these topics will be future sessions. So if you see one, you're like, I'd love a whole half hour spent on this topic alone, don't hesitate to throw that in there. We want this to be what's most relevant to you all. I think reusing, so pre-project, the whole point of that is just you've done all the hard work in the after action, the post-project. So now when we do it again, what can I use again? Were there previous volunteers that were great? Maybe they said they can't come this time, but they'll have people they can send the invite to that are, again, that sphere of influence where they can tap others like themselves. I think thinking about that, a lot of people want to help but cannot do it themselves. How can you use them as advocates to just pass and share the word on? We're such a social network now that passing and sharing of opportunities means a lot more coming from Elizabeth asking her friends and family to do it than that person behind Elizabeth asking them directly because they know who Elizabeth is. So use people, use their faces, use their families, previous media partners that you can tap again to do the same thing they did before, thinking about what you had noted to do differently. So I'll leave this as just kind of a quick homework as far as, making a list, figuring out your priority goals, schedule time for yourself, and then start using that scheduled time intentionally on those most important things. Some of the resources that Court's dropped into the chat to help organize and keep those priorities at the priority level. Thinking about, if I'm putting time into this, let's make it sustainable. Let's put it together in a way that I can repeat it, use it for another group, use it for another like project. And then I think the final kind of place I wanted to land was just a place of, for tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today. It's a big statement, but I will say it is always amazing to me to work with people that just always seem prepared. And I realize in kind of looking back at it, it wasn't that I walked into the meeting ill prepared. They prepared for the meeting 2 months ago. They've been working on this topic for a year. And so they're able to bring forward into time the things they've been thinking about and prioritizing back then. So I think that part of just thinking about tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today. And if you make a plan, while your plan may fall to pieces, you will be in much better shape to move forward with intentional action because you thought through an initial plan. You can plan again so much easier when you've done that hard work. So that all said, Court, we may just go ahead and open up for questions. I actually don't have a clock in front of me to see where we're at, which I may have gone long, so.
I think we're good. We have about 13 minutes left. We have so many questions.
Yeah. Thank you guys for joining us for Have to Grab. So.
Yes, if you have to go, we understand, but also we're open. I do have a lot of great questions here. Yeah, some of the questions involve, what if I really don't have time to do particular activities but they need to get done. So one of the really strong suggestions that I see coming from other volunteer management leaders that we also suggest as well is finding someone that you can nurture as as a volunteer that can be a leader of volunteers. So maybe someone who's been with your organization for a while, or someone who has extra time, or they have the desire to give that, and kind of mentoring them so that they can mentor other volunteers. That's one way that's really creative to delegate and get some things off your calendar as far as planning and prioritizing. And some folks are talking about keeping up with people. If engagement is one of your top priorities, keeping up with people through a volunteer management newsletter. We have some great resources on that on our blog at galaxydigital.com about volunteer management newsletters. And that is also another way that you can kind of leverage your time, is just knowing, like, I'm sitting down, this is my time to write my volunteer newsletter, because I know that it moves the needle for me on my end of year goal, which is engagement. We want to see those volunteers showing up, being really engaged, being appreciated, being happy, and logging their hours. What other questions do we have? Oh, Elizabeth tapped your simple homework points. Yeah. And for some people, you know, some of us love, like, some people are like me and they love project planning. I'm so into it. I love it. It's kind of my jam. I really love using tools and tasks. I love managing data. That's not everybody, you know, not everybody it loves doing that. And I recognize that. So we all have different needs, and we're all sort of we're just a diverse group, a diverse community of who we serve, how we serve, and the resources that we have in our organizations. What other topics or questions? I want to make sure I'm getting everyone. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much.
And I think recruiting is that's definitely one Court will need to note for like an actual just webinar on it. But I think recruiting can come in so many ways. And I think one of the things that Court and I talk about is don't try something once. Try it 10 times, and then you'll know whether or not that method worked. I think some of the barriers for recruiting are often timing. So you want to test and think about, like, is this at a bad time for people, or the current volunteers who are coming? Do you see kind of, oh, I've got a bunch of retirees that can make this time. That's great. But I'm not seeing anybody who's in the 8 to 5 workforce ever joining us. So let me think about how I might incorporate something that could be virtually attended for those who have less time. Or maybe I'm going to look for incorporating something that lets them kind of think through once a week versus a once a day thing, something they can commit to once a month because they have limited commitment time, but they'd be such a skilled volunteer. It's worth accommodating a different looking schedule to pull in a pool of people that you can't tap in your regular rhythm. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of making someone comfortable. I think sometimes we ask too much in our first engagement, and they're really not sure who you are. It's kind of like, it's that analogy of speed dating. In the speed dating, you don't want to launch into your family history and your goals for life and how many children you want. You probably want to start with something that's just interesting about you, that they want to keep talking to you. And so they'll set up that second time to talk to you more. So I think recruitment and retention are a lot of steps, taking a natural, simple step and not trying to jump all the way to step 10 because you desperately need somebody. It's more really trying to take them away and along a path that fits them, that feels comfortable, so that they're starting to get more and more engaged naturally, instead of getting that ask that just feels uncomfortable because they weren't even sure who you were just yet. So I think some of that's just strategies, and it's, again, a lot of different things. If there are pieces that you're like, this is what we struggle with, that info@galaxydigital.com, would love for you to send, this is a challenge, this is a pain point. Then we can try to wrap some of those questions into our next webinar.
Yes, I feel like this one that we just did today, we just really, just kind of cracked open so many really important topics. And while we did focus more on planning, I think the important thing to remember is that all of these topics are deeply important, and they take a lot of steps. And so that's why really getting, kind of get in the reins on that understanding of the planning and how, recruitment is also just a huge topic and it's ongoing. And so without project planning, it can be really challenging to kind of get that traction that you want to get, just like what Elizabeth was saying, where it takes a lot of time and a lot of steps. And that's one of the things that we really try to help our clients and the organizations that we work with our software Get Connected, is really build something that once you've got it up and running, certain things are easier, like email communication and, just reminding volunteers about their schedule. So you don't have to do that manually anymore. Taking some of those things off your plate through the power of technology, so that you can really leverage your time to do some of this big picture thinking of your overall recruitment strategy and engagement strategy. So you can always find us at galaxydigital.com. You can always email us at info@galaxydigital.com. We have so many resources in our learning center that speak to a lot of the questions that have come up today in the chat. So please do go to galaxydigital.com and spend some time in our learning center, because I dropped so many links in there to answer different questions. There's really quite a lot there. You can also get on our email newsletter list if you're not already, the Volunteer Management Insider, where we share those articles. And
the plug too for the March 10th. So it's volunteer appreciation. So March 10th, we're going to do a session on volunteer appreciation. But part of what I want to weave into that one is how you can take those moments of recognizing volunteers and appreciating them and actually weave that into your retention and your recruitment strategies. So that's going to be a very just timely, because Volunteer Appreciation Month is coming upon us. So I think March 10th, that'll be our main topic, but we'll keep doing everything we can to kind of keep these themes of what you guys are really forced to face, retention, recruitment, engagement, every single day into it. So thank you guys so much for joining. I know it was the lunch hour, and you probably got to jump to other things. So we will keep hanging for a little bit if there's any intentional questions that you still have, but thank you all so much. And do Court's sending out a lot of information, so you'll be able to sign up for the next one. Check out any of those resources she's talking about. That galaxydigital.com learning center and the VMI are just really well done. So that's a lot of her. So thanks to Court and the hard work she is putting in. Thank you guys all.
Yes, we have a great team, and we really appreciate everyone's feedback. That's just going to help us make these sessions stronger and stronger for you. And the way I look at it is you get one little thing that helps you in any session, just move the needle just a little bit more in your program. That's great. If you've got one takeaway that you're like, yeah, that feels refreshing, I'm going to do that, then that's amazing. That's how I look at attending educational sort of things like this. I love it. And we really do want to be supportive of our network and our community. And we really do love volunteer programs. That's our primary motivation. I will be emailing out the recording as well. And there were some folks that asked for additional resources, like the slides. And one of the things I'm going to work on is figuring out how I can do closed captioning now. So if you have feedback like that, that's really useful for us, getting better and better at writing our descriptions and creating these topics for you. And again, you can find us at galaxydigital.com or info@galaxydigital if you have more questions. Elizabeth, is there anything else? Did I miss any questions from anyone today? Thank you so much.
I think I was just actually going to say, Court, we should just make sure we grab the chat, because I think there's a lot of really great questions buried in there, and let's make sure we can go back through them and incorporate them into the next one. So thank you all for being so present and for bringing such great stuff. And I'm glad you found this helpful. And as Court said, I can't say enough that if one thing is going to go into it that goes well, that's great. I think the strategic planning training, I think that's another one. I think that topics that you guys want to plan around is going to be really helpful for us. So strategic planning, how do you strategically do even more? It's probably going deeper, and that can be a session we consider, where if we said, okay, let's do strategic planning around this topic, then that's something that we could think about and kind of prioritize that topic. So yeah, that would be lovely. I'd love to do that too. All right.
I love to plan. I do.
I'll just come. You plan it. I'll be there. It'll be great.
Elizabeth knows how much I love putting things on the calendar. So
it's good. It's made the projects go much simpler. I mean, I think, case in point, Court plans. She invites me to brainstorming for our next session. We read through the chats. We take your feedback. We plan what we'll put into the next session. And those hours are intentional hours that I don't deprioritize because Court's there waiting on me. So I think that moment of make yourself as important as that person that you would want to meet with every single time, and meet with yourself. You know a lot more than you probably realize you do if you had the time to sit down and think.
Here's a really interesting question. Ideas on incentivizing volunteers besides financially. So that would be really specific to what your program is, and the types of people that you are attracting as volunteers. So some people volunteer because they want to make friends. Some people volunteer because they really want to give to a very specific cause. So that I think we could really speak to maybe more on like a recruitment or sort of thing, like why are people even coming? Because that can help understand why we're incentivizing them in general. One of the things we do in our software is also we have like little, like you can earn sort of like a badge based on how many hours. Yeah. So benchmarks are super fun. And that's a great way to kind of keep people, instead of waiting till someone gets to 100 hours, recognize them at 10, recognize them at 25. And it doesn't have to, it could be a coffee. It doesn't have to be, or it could be some donuts. I don't know. I love donuts. Maybe a little party.
There's something about human nature that we want our friends and family to be proud of us or to care about what we care about. So like some of those elements that I like so much, like the benchmarks you mentioned, they're shareable. So it's thinking about how you can send them a thank you that's maybe a little story or something they can share with their friends so that their mom sees they did something great. And that's something that, again, it puts a marketing emphasis behind what you're doing where really you are appreciating them, but their sphere is seeing how this is an organization that they care about, they're proud of them. It just builds that intrigue so that more people now want to go see what it is that this person's been doing. So I think that's another key piece, but we'll try to tie a lot of this into the next session and not hold anybody any longer. Yeah. And I am going to say bye on my end, but thank you again for so many great questions. And Court, I'll let you wrap it up if there's any final stop recording steps or something that we have to do.
Yeah, exactly. There were a lot of questions, and I think that you've given us all quite a lot to consider for future sessions. There's so much we can dive into here. Thank you for your feedback. I will work on editing the recording to make sure that everyone gets that, along with sending out some additional resources in that email to you all. And I thank you for your time and your presence. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate you being here. And you can reach out to us anytime at info@galaxydigital.com and let us know if you have any questions or if there's any way we can best serve you. So with that, I'll say goodbye and we'll see you next time. I am gonna, Brenda, to answer your question, someone did ask me about a certificate. And so I'm going to figure out a way to make that. So I'll get on that. And maybe I'll be able to send that as like a downloadable for you. All right. Well, thank you. And if there's anything else, you can email us. So I'll see you soon. And thank you very much.